welcome. We have these meetings every month with different topics about crime prevention and about how we can improve safety in the city. I'm actually going to turn it over to our acting chief, Tirona, who's going to talk to you a little bit about his role for this period of time for the department and department news and updates. And he'll give an overview, and then we'll have an opportunity to take questions because we really want to hear your questions and have a dialogue with you. So I'm going to turn it over now.
Thank you, Michelle, and good afternoon to everybody. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too.
Thank you. I know many of you, but I think that I should start out by just introducing myself very quickly. My name is Louie Tirona. I am currently the acting chief of police. My official title is assistant chief of police. I've been a police officer only with the city of Richmond, meaning I haven't come from anywhere else, for 28 years.
Wow.
So somehow I am the longest serving Richmond cop currently working, which is unusual. But right now I'm the acting chief. As most of you know, Chief French is dealing with some personal matters. And while she is dealing with those matters, I am the acting chief of police. My expectation, hope, and desire is that Chief French can return sooner rather than later, and I can hand off the police department back to her. She and I go back a long ways. There were very few cops left from the 90s, and we are at least two of them. But I take this responsibility very seriously because I do love the organization and the city. It really has been a true humbling experience and honor to be a police officer here in Richmond for honestly longer than I've done anything else in my life, aside from being a son and a brother. So I take this very seriously. The department has seen a lot of change and growth and improvement in the 28 years I've been here. And I'm still very hopeful about the future of the police department and the city of Richmond in general. So that's who I am. I don't know what else to say. I've worked most of the assignments in the PD, from patrol officer to detective to various training responsibilities. Went up the ranks, and here I am. So I'm happy to be here with all of you today. My plan is to talk about 2021 and some of the statistics from a crime perspective, and then talk about some of the changes inside the PD for this new calendar year. And then hopefully have a lot of time to talk to you all and answer whatever questions you may have, because I get bored hearing myself talk. So actually some very good news. And I attribute this to the amazing work that all of the employees here in the police department have done, even during this crazy last couple of years of the pandemic. In addition to all the members of our crime prevention team, both inside and outside of the police department, really is a lot of good news in the sense that in comparison to the year 2020, 2021 saw a substantial decrease in both violent and property-related crimes. Now, I know this is little consolation to those who have been victimized, and any of these crimes is too many, but we do have to acknowledge that progress has been made. So we saw a total decrease of violent crime by 34% and property crimes by 13%. Almost every category of crime decreased, with the exception of robberies with the use of a firearm, which increased a little bit. As you can see, Richmond has an average of 785 violent crimes in the year, and almost 3,800 property crimes, which again, we could definitely improve on, but once more, I think we are seeing some progress. In 2021, we received a total of almost 98,000 calls for service. That's a lot. I mean, when you compare those numbers to any other agency in our vicinity, we far outpace everybody else in terms of calls for service. 17% of those calls were initiated by the officers, while 83% were initiated by people calling in, asking for assistance. But again, I want to reiterate the fact that these improvements were really due to the amazing work that the officers and our professional staff and our crime prevention folks have been continuing to do. I know it's been difficult to engage face-to-face with COVID, but I think we're doing it better than most other places. And we're going to continue to adapt to the environment we find ourselves in. Now, what I will say is it's not the time to rest on any laurels. There's an ancient samurai proverb that says, when the battle appears over, it's time to tighten your helmet straps. And what that means is you have to be ready. You have to be ready. And that's the bottom line. And that things like crime rates are always somewhat tenuous. And there is some truth, or at least some potential truth, in the possibility that not all crimes are being reported. So we have to take these statistics with a certain amount of healthy skepticism. But again, I think it's a good indication of a positive trend, and primarily due to the amazing work that the officers continue to do, even though they've been at the forefront of dealing with the pandemic and the associated disruption to society, in addition to our professional staff, and in collaboration with all of the community groups, because this doesn't happen just by the police. It happens because all of us are working together to create a better Richmond. This next slide is kind of interesting because it breaks down crime rate per 1,000 residents. And as you can see, in 2021, our population was just a little over 111,000 people. And you can see the crime rate per 1,000 residents for violent crime is 4%. And then for property crimes, it's 25%. In 2020, we actually had a larger population. And you can see the crime rate per 1,000 there as well. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of these statistics because they get really granular, but they are good trends. But they also show that the amount of work is still quite extensive. There are a lot of calls come in, a lot of incidents are being handled by police officers and our dispatchers, in addition to our partners with the fire department. There's a lot of activity that still goes on. So, but again, it's a good trend. As you can see here, this shows a graph of violent and property crimes based on years. And there is a slight downward trajectory, which is always good. But again, let's not get complacent, because as soon as we do, as a community, things can change rapidly. So we always want to stay mindful of what we're doing and everything that we do. So I wanted to start with that because I think we hear a lot of doom and gloom throughout the media and things that are happening. And I want to be honest with all of you in the community that we are seeing some positive progress here in Richmond. And I'm going to switch this now to talk about staffing and just some of the changes that are occurring within the police department for 2022. All right, oops. All right, now, does everyone see this PowerPoint with the police car up front? Yes? No? Now?
Yes.
Okay.
Now.
Awesome. Thank you. So this is a presentation I did to City Council about 2 weeks ago, just to give the council an understanding of where the police department is, what our staffing level looks like, some of the changes that we have to make in order to provide the best service we can, and to provide that situational awareness that is necessary for any kind of decision making. So I'm just going to skip through a few of these things. I will point out this is the photo in this slide is your patrol team 1, so that senior day shift, actually working Thanksgiving Day, and I had the real honor and privilege of working patrol beat with those officers on Thanksgiving Day, working patrol beat 1. So that's for you, all of you in Santa Fe and Point Richmond. I was working your beat on Thanksgiving Day. It was actually kind of fun. Had a good time. I went through some of the staffing numbers specifically year over year in terms of our staffing within the police department. It's not a secret, it's gotten smaller. We have had, and this is one of the things I wanted to emphasize, quite a few people leave the department last year. A large majority left due to retirements, and then quite a few also left to go to other agencies for various reasons. I think the big thing I want to put forward is we have a lot of folks who are approaching or are of retirable age, which will be a challenge in the very near future, because these are people who have served 25, 30 plus years to the city of Richmond and are now at the age where they're eligible to retire. And these are all negotiated benefits. And they've reached the point where they can exercise that option. I thank all of them for their service. They've been very honorable in that service. But the reality is that we're going to face quite a few vacancies in the very near future that we have to prepare for. So as you can see at the bottom of that slide, by the end of December 2023, 28 current sworn personnel will be eligible to retire. And let me just backtrack a little bit. This presentation was focused primarily on sworn personnel. That doesn't mean the sworn personnel are any more important than our professional staff, but I wanted to focus on one thing at a time. So that's why this is specific to sworn personnel. So for the priorities for 2022, my priority in terms of where we put the officers is on patrol, because my belief is when somebody needs us, they really need us right now. And staffing patrol has been one of the greatest challenges we've been facing in the last few years. We've been fortunate to have a very strong investigative staff, but things like injuries, sending people to training, vacations, and then more recently, COVID has really had an effect on our ability to staff patrol without having to force officers to work to fill vacancies, meaning forced overtime. And we're in that situation we were in that situation for most of 2021, where officers were being forced to fill vacancies in patrol. And that gets old very fast. It's difficult. It becomes an issue for officer wellness, because we all know if you work too long, that has a detrimental effect on the individual, that has a detrimental effect on families, and that even has a detrimental effect on the actual service that could be provided. And there is a real thing known as burnout, and we want to be mindful of that. So moving into 2022, we actually placed more officers on patrol teams to try to alleviate some of this mandatory forced overtime. to account for things like vacations or sick leaves or being able to send officers to training, because that is a very important component of developing the department personnel into the kind of officers that the city really deserves. That leads to the second priority, which is enhanced training for our officers. The investigations are going to be a bigger responsibility for patrol because the investigative staff is being reduced. I mean, I can only cut the pie so many ways. And so I had to collapse or actually remove some investigative units in order to place more officers in patrol. I'm hoping this is a temporary thing just for the year, and as staffing improves, we can start replenishing those resources in units such as our old crime reduction violence team and traffic and other units that are really important. But right now, I just don't have the personnel to devote to those efforts. Another area that I really want to focus on is development of policy, making sure we're up to date and that we're in compliance with all legislative changes. I'd like to really look into improving our return to work program for our injured employees. And then a big one is retention, recruiting, and hiring. I mean, as I mentioned, with some of the staffing challenges we will be facing here in the near future, retaining the officers that we have, recruiting new ones, and hiring them is going to be a priority, and not a very easy one, because the interest in policing is really kind of taken a hit recently. So here are some of the modifications that were made. Regulatory unit, that was a unit that was focused on things like alcohol and beverage control, all the cannabis dispensaries. Those responsibilities will now be transferred to code enforcement. I just don't have the personnel to do that anymore. The robbery and property units are being combined under one unit. We had a team of officers known as CVRT, the Crime and Violence Reduction Team. Their primary focus was on proactive type of enforcement against some of the more violent offenders within our community. They've been very successful, and this in no way minimizes the positive effects that they've had, but I just don't have the personnel to maintain them in those positions, so they're returning back to patrol. My hope is that their expertise will enhance the patrol efforts. We're just going to have to be a lot smarter in the use of our resources. Traffic and youth services will maintain vacancies, and there is an analysis that will be done for calls for service and how they're resolved, both for police and fire, to see if there are other efficiency efforts we can make to use our personnel better. That just talks about where the people are. Probably the next slide is probably more interesting. You can see here that 2021 versus 2022, the largest piece of that pie on both sides is patrol, which is where it's supposed to be. But as you can see, 21 to 22, it's significantly grown in patrol. But what has shrunk is investigations. And so they're going to be really challenged in investigations to do the best they can with less resources. And that's just a reality. I can't, like I said, I can't cut the pie, or I can't make the pie any bigger right now. So that's where the personnel will be allocated. I'm still very hopeful that this year we're going to see some improvements. I can tell you that just this afternoon, I actually made a conditional job offer to a new police officer, and I'm happy about that. I made a conditional offer to another police officer just 2 weeks ago. We have one of our cadets who is now in the academy to become a police officer, and so our in-house kind of farming system, as most of you know, we have the Explorer program and then the cadet program. That has been very fruitful in terms of developing local interest in the profession, getting them, teenagers involved in the police department, and then cultivating those who are really interested in becoming, making law enforcement their career, and then seeing them develop into cadets, and then seeing them develop into future police officers. That's an area that I want to continue to develop and champion, because it has been very successful. We have a lot of our officers who came from and grew up in the city of Richmond, and quite a few who went through that process in terms of Explorer cadet to police officer. With that said, also, I'm pleased that I was able to announce 3 new lieutenant promotions just a week and a half ago. In fact, I'll be promoting them in terms of the actual ceremony tomorrow morning. So Sergeant Ernest Lucas, Sergeant Carl Dean, Sergeant Elizabeth Bashan will be promoted to the rank of lieutenant tomorrow. And I'm very excited about that, because all 3 are exceptional leaders, and really paving the way for the future of the police department. We have sergeants testing, promotional testing actually occurring now, and captain testing will be starting fairly soon. So we're trying to develop the next generation of leadership for the police department, because it's important. The police department is bigger than any one person, and we need to ensure the success into the future of the police department, because that's what the city of Richmond and its community deserves. So we're moving positively in those directions. I think I probably spoke enough. So unless Michelle has something.
No. I see that there's hands up, and I see there's a couple of hands raised, and there were questions in the chat. I'm going to try to take them in the order from the chat, if that's okay. So I'm just scrolling back for any questions that I see, and you can see the comments in the chat, Chief, about just a summary with all the improvements that the police department made over the last 15 years. It brought national attention to the city, concerns about basically cuts to the department and cuts to some of those resources that made the police department successful. And there not being a sentiment that our police officers can work in a city that pays more and has less crime, and knowing that the community appreciates them. The other question that came up is, with the statistics showing improvement on violent crime and property crime, do you think this is more fodder for those who say, well, let's reduce the police budget even more? What are your thoughts about the $3 million budget reduction? So that's the first question.
Okay. I would say that the crime trends that we saw in 2021 have to be looked at and studied a little bit more in depth. COVID has definitely had some kind of effect. What kind of effect it was, I'm not really sure. And I think smarter people than me are just as perplexed. But I would say that even with the reduced staffing that we have, it's proof that the officers that we do have still are going above and beyond the call for service, because they continue to do what they're expected to do in exceptional ways. I mean, when just this past few months, I've been able to go around to the various patrol teams and give out various medals for things like life-saving, things like courage and bravery, things like community service. And it shows that even with challenges in staffing, the officers are willing to do what they were called to do. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the staffing challenges have been easy, because what it means is that the officers that we do have here are having to work that much more to fill those gaps. And even with the dedication that these officers show, at some point there could be a saturation point. And that's what I worry about. Have officers left for other departments because they had the perception that they weren't being supported for various reasons in this city? The answer is yes. There are also officers who left because they perceive better pay and benefits in other departments. And right now it's a buyer's market. We are competing with places like BART or Alameda County Sheriff's Office, or you name it, Fairfield, who right now are able to offer things like hiring bonuses. They're able to offer higher pay for trainees, and with less of the perceived political concern. And we're competing with all those. There are less people who want to be police officers. All of the jurisdictions around us are facing similar challenges in terms of staffing. And it's more than just us competing with El Cerrito or San Pablo. We're competing with departments 30, 50, 60, 100 miles away now. So we have to be very thoughtful about making the city of Richmond a welcoming environment. And it's not just the police department. I mean, it's for many other city departments, but we do have to make it welcoming in terms of people know when they become police officers, if you come to Richmond, you're going to work. I mean, Richmond has an improved reputation, but let's not pretend like Richmond isn't busier than most other jurisdictions, because it is. We have a lot of crime challenges still, even with those statistics I showed. If you compare us to Concord or similar cities of similar size, our per capita rate is still very challenging. So there aren't any easy answers, but I think the first step is to let the officers who work here know that they're welcomed and appreciated, and that candidates who want to come here not only will be challenged, but will also be appreciated and welcomed, because the city honestly deserves the best officers it can get.
Thank you, Chief. Yeah, and I think that is something that is overwhelmingly, we've gotten a lot of questions about, is the whole issue of staffing and the impact that that's had on services. I see that Naomi's hand is up. So Naomi, we'll go to you next, and Cordell, and then I will go back to the questions in the chat.
28 officers that's supposed to retire in 23.
Mm-hmm.
Was that correct? So have the police get somebody into those colleges so they can get ready to be ready when the others leave, or is that a problem?
I didn't catch most of that. Maybe to answer your question, I can tell you this: we can't pre-hire people with the anticipation of them leaving. We can only fill those positions once those positions are vacated, and that's one of the challenges.
Okay. Well, then doesn't it take 2 years to train them?
It can take up to that, yes. I mean, it's a very long process. Just the hiring process alone can be 4 to 8 months, and then 6 months in the academy if they're an entry level, and then another 5 to 6 months in field training here once they get out of the academy. So from application to being a solo police officer, you're looking at least a year.
Oh, wow.
Did that answer your question, Ms. Naomi?
Yes, that did. Okay, but one more. I came here back in the 70s when you had the cowboys, and you're correct. The police department was not reliable then. But since then, we have really improved in getting things done, and other people's looking at us. I served the police commission for 11 years. It was supposed to be 9, but it was 11. And police commission did a wonderful job during the cowboy time. We got rid of some, and then we got rid of some more. But I want to thank you for standing in for Lisa while she's out on her problem. And weren't you supposed to be going on retirement too?
You have a good memory, Naomi. I mean, to be honest, yes, I was eligible to go last year, but I couldn't leave the police department in the situation it finds itself in with Chief French being out, because I actually love this department. I'm not going to leave until Chief French's situation is resolved. So you're stuck with me for now.
I'm not stuck with you. I don't even have to deal with you.
But I am committed to the organization. Like I said, until Chief French, hopefully returns, and that's my expectation and desire and hope. And then after that, I'll fade away.
Okay.
We appreciate, and thank you, Miss Naomi. I appreciate that. I want to make sure we get to all some of the other questions. So I'm going to go to the chat, and then I'll go back to speakers. So there also are 2 questions that are kind of similarly related. One, Chief, is a question about, would the police department consider doing a reorganization chart, and what are the ways that the police can help reduce crime hotspots? And then kind of similarly related was a question about being short-staffed and kind of lag time on patrol calls. It's a common theme on Nextdoor that unfortunately our response times might be lower because of the staffing levels. Did you want to address that about the reorganization and hotspot crime and then also improving response time?
Sure. So in terms of reorganization, that's what I discussed in terms of placing many of the officers who were previously in the investigation back patrol. In terms of looking at overall organizational structure, that's always something that's on the table. Meaning, if there's a better way to use our resources, I know I am very open to examining that. I know Chief French was as well, because again, we only have so many. Our resources are finite. In terms of So now that leads to, how do we use those resources better, right? We are engaged in adopting a new information kind of database. It's a system that helps mine through intelligence through a variety of databases that will hopefully help us in terms of our crime solvability. It's a system called Peregrine. It actually was approved by City Council, and I appreciate that they approved it. That helps us collate this information better, because let's face it, we're in an information age and there's a ton of information out there. And many times, if we rely on humans to have to siphon through all of that info, things can be missed. There's a lot of software that's available now that will help minimize that some of those human failings. And then we're not completely relying on technology, because I don't necessarily trust it all, but there are ways that we can use the information we currently have better. And that is one of the approaches we're going to take. As I mentioned, the goal is, as staffing improves and people, and we're able to fill some of these holes that have been created, we're going to do that. In terms of response times, well, again, I'm going to be very honest. for non-in-progress kind of calls, for calls where people aren't in physical danger. Is there going to be a continued delay in some responses? The answer is yes. But the direction to the officers is when it's a question of safety, meaning a resident's safety, someone's breaking into your house. I mean, breaking in, not that it already happened, that they're long gone. We're going to do everything we can to get there as fast as possible. I would still place RPD up against any agency around us in terms of our response to in-progress crimes, meaning calls where people's lives are in jeopardy. We're second to none. Our cops know how to do it and will get there fast. But the reality is that some of the property-related crimes or crimes that have already been committed, there's likely going to continue to be delays, and I will apologize for that. But the volume of calls that come in, the number of officers, that's just reality. That's where we are. We're still better than many other jurisdictions. I mean, if you compare us, and I hate to throw down other cities, but if you compare us to a city like Vallejo, we're still light years ahead of them in terms of our response times, even to low level type crimes. The officers want to be out there to help. But again, we get an inordinate number of calls, and there's only so many officers per shift. And the expectation is they will have to do more of the investigative work on the front end because I don't have as much staff in investigations now.
Thanks, Chief. I appreciate that. I'm also going to ask that everybody please mute yourself. I notice there are some people who are unmuted. So if I mute you, that's just so that you don't pop up on the screen during the chat. So make sure you mute yourself. I'm going to go back to the hands raised, and then we have quite a few questions. So I'm just going to ask that everybody who speaks, please keep your question brief so that we can try to get to as many as we can. Cordell, you're next, and then we'll go back to the chat, and then we'll go to Carla.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you,
Yes.
Cordell.
Good. So the reason I brought up the reorg chart is because I looked at other cities around us and how their structure is, and so I looked at the city of Mountain View and their police department, and I'm like, okay, so this is how their structure is. So I was thinking that that if you can do something quite similar to Mountain View, that would be very helpful. But and then the other question I had was are you planning on bringing positions to the personnel board at some point?
New positions?
Yes, some positions, you know, like a deputy police chief, that type of thing.
Nothing like that. So to answer your question, Mountain View is a great city, but they have very low crime. It's reality. And so I mean, I'm willing to look at their organizational chart to see how it compares to us, but I can tell you that the cities are very different. In terms of personnel board, there aren't any new positions that either I or when Chief French was here, we're trying to create. I just want to fill the positions that we currently have. I mean, that's my focus, is that we still have officer vacancies. We have vacancies in our records section, dispatch, in our property vault. Throughout the department, we have vacancies. So maybe that's a plea for me to all of you. If you have folks that you can refer, we're hiring. I mean, and not just police officer, but in many other positions. And I would love to have some homegrown folks working within the police department. I mean, I'm always welcoming that. So no new positions, Cordell, that I'm looking to bring forward anytime soon. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Cordell. I appreciate that. I'm going to go back to the chat and try to pick up a few of these questions in the chat because I think there's some really good ones. One is about, you know, following up with the last question in some ways. I thought the city of Richmond DPS would route a 911 dispatch call rather than Vallejo 911 dispatch. So this is a question regarding the routing of calls when people call 911. And then maybe we could also hit up the second one, which is please explain the duties of the regulatory unit that is being transferred to code enforcement.
Sure. So 911, that's based on cell towers. And the cell tower that receives the call from the mobile phone, the closest cell tower will route that call to the nearest 911 center, the nearest 911 dispatch center. And so that's why many of the calls that are made to 911 that occur near I-80 will be routed directly to CHP. And CHP's dispatch center is in Vallejo. That's why it goes there. Now, we don't have any control over that because it's all based on cell tower location. And then once they realize it's in, or they find out it's in Richmond, they transfer that call over. It's fairly quick, but there is a delay. There are areas along 580 that occurs on, and then also up in the beat 8 and 9, Hilltop and Carriage Hills area, where those transfers don't come to our dispatch center; they go to CHP. I wish it was different, but that's how the cell towers are configured. As far as regulatory, they were a unit that was developed to deal with all of the regulations surrounding alcohol and beverage control laws. That's how it first started. It was the cannabis responsibility was added to them when the city created the ordinance that legalized some of the distribution and cultivation of cannabis within the city of Richmond. The city obtains fees for those entities who obtain licenses to manufacture and sell things like cannabis, and then also alcohol and tobacco and those kind of products. And so our regulatory unit was designed to do inspections and ensure that those businesses were in compliance with the local laws. That's what the regulatory unit was. It was comprised of a sergeant, an officer, and a code enforcement officer. So 3 personnel. Those responsibilities are now transferred to code enforcement. And we are in cooperation with them to give them the support that they need to continue the enforcement of these ordinances. But we just don't have the personnel to devote to that effort anymore.
Thanks, Chief. And then as a clarification for that last question, I want to make sure I clarify about response time, just going back to the chat. And that is the time from which they receive the call to responding to the matter, but the response time in answering the 911 dispatch call itself. Can you talk about our 911 dispatch call center and the response time, and if staffing has impacted that?
Yeah, it definitely has. So our call center, unlike every other call center in the county, with the exception of San Ramon, handles both police, fire, and emergency medical dispatching. That's a lot of calls for service. So not only do 911 calls go to our dispatch center for police, fire calls, but also for when people are having medical emergencies, our dispatchers are trained to provide that direct information about what to do until paramedics or fire department get on scene. So they literally have, it's not a book, but let's say a binder. If someone's having chest pains, this is exactly what the caller is instructed to do to try to give that emergency medical attention before the first responders even ever show up, which is a lifesaver. But the reality is this, that the staffing and dispatch has also been severely challenged, where you would have one dispatcher focus primarily on police calls. And then another dispatcher focused on fire-related calls. And then the other one just handling calls, receiving calls. And they're having to juggle those responsibilities back and forth. And just so everyone here knows, we also dispatch for El Cerrito Police. And so they're doing the best they can with the resources they have, but the challenges that the police officers face in terms of staffing is mirrored very closely in dispatch. It's a very high stress job. I give them a lot of kudos because I couldn't do it. And be just sitting there and taking calls from folks who are experiencing the worst days of their life and trying to keep them calm and getting the information that's necessary and getting the right people there. And then not even being able to physically see the resolution of the call. That takes a special kind of person to be able to do that and do it successfully and do it day in and day out. So they really are the unsung heroes within the first responder community, and it's very challenging.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. So we have a couple more questions in the chat, but we're going to go to Carla for the last question that was this live. So go ahead, Carla.
Hey, thanks. Chief, you're doing a great job for our city right now and the struggles that you guys are handling. My other, I don't know what other police department can do what our guys do. Our guys are the best and really top-notch officers. We really appreciate them a lot. On the other note is, I would really like to see, we hear about people that are retiring out, but we hear about it the day of or the next day that they retired out. It would be really nice for the public to know, I know that they know ahead of time when they're going to retire. So maybe if the community wants to send a card or, send a cake or whatever, that we can do that for them. So that would be my wish for 2022, if we can be apprised of any retirements that are happening this year, next year, and especially knowing that we could have lost you last year and nobody would have known until you left.
Okay, I think that's fair. I would have to talk to, well, obviously the officer, the affected officer or employee would have to be okay with pre-announcing that. But I will talk to our staff and see how we can do that. Now, there is one wrinkle. Some of the retirements that occur happen almost by surprise. And let me explain this. Some of our folks who are on various forms of injury leave, who are retirable, sometimes we don't know that the city has retired them until the day it happens, meaning we as the police department. And that's something I've been trying to work with HR in terms of improving, but I do like the idea, Carla. Let me talk it over with my staff as well as the POA and PMA and some of the other associations within the department, because honestly, that show of appreciation for those who've dedicated most of their lives to the city is something I would really encourage. So I like the idea. Thanks, Carla. Don't be surprised if you see it happening.
Looking forward to that. So, and then one more other thing, I just want to give kudos to Ernest Lucas. He's amazing. He's done a great job and I'm really happy for his promotion. So
I'm expecting a lot out of him.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you.
Right.
And I think he actually may have joined our call. So maybe he's around to hear that kudo. That's awesome. We have a couple more questions in the chat. I want to be respectful of time, so I'm going to try to condense them and get to as many as we can to be respectful of time that we have together. So one of the questions has to do with parking enforcement. We have a lot of a large number of expired registration vehicles driven in the north and east, including, and you can see in the chat, someone's mentioning someone who might be, different folks, a prominent figure. Is there anything that can be done about those expired registration vehicles?
Well, I mean, obviously, calling into the hotline for parking enforcement is one way. Now, everyone needs to understand for most of 2021, we only had one parking enforcement officer. And we hired a new one, and the second one just a few months ago now. So now we have two. I still have, I believe, 3 vacancies that I'm trying to fill. And I'm fairly confident we'll be able to do that. But until that happens, that's 2 parking enforcement officers for the entire city of Richmond. That doesn't mean those things aren't being addressed. In fact, I was trying to look for an email I sent to one of our council members not that long ago who brought up a concern with expired registration. I probably can't find it right now, but I actually gave him the statistics for 2020 and 2021 in terms of numbers of vehicles towed for expired registration, and even broke it down by district. Maybe I can, once I find it, I can share it with Michelle, and she can share it at a future date. But they are being towed. I mean, if I remember correctly, I think 2020, somewhere around 400 plus cars were towed specifically for expired registration. And then in 2021, it was a very similar number. Is that good? Is that bad? I really don't know. But I can tell you that there are efforts being made to address it. Can there be better efforts? Of course, there can always be better efforts, but it's not being ignored.
Thanks, Chief. I appreciate that. We're coming down to the last couple. And this one is one that's come up a lot with a lot of folks who were asking about officers who are an injury. Is there an injury comp plan to bring back officers within their medical limitations that can help out in the office where other officers can go out on the street? So, I don't know if you want to address that. And we know that, sometimes overwork can also produce injuries. So we want to talk about that.
Sure. Yes, it does happen. So when an officer or any employee is injured, whatever limitations their doctor places on them in terms of work, we take into account. If they can come in and work in accordance with those limitations, we do allow for that to happen. Now, does that alleviate work for a patrol officer? To a certain degree, it can. Like, they can, an officer who can't go out on the street can take phone reports, or possibly, in-person reports for people who come to the station. But I'm going to also say this: it's hard to replace the duties of a patrol or any police officer with someone who can't do the full duties, because many of the restrictions will restrict them from dealing with potentially dangerous individuals. So suspects, anything that might exacerbate their injured status will be limited. And so it makes it somewhat challenging, but we are exploring ways to get officers back to work sooner and work within the confines of their limitations. It's just, it is a challenge, and I know most of our officers who get injured they're chomping at the bit to come back to work, because none of us like to sit still. But they also have to heal and recover, and sometimes we're our own worst enemies, because we'll try to push it faster than we should, and then the injuries don't really heal. And that's a challenge, but we do allow for that. And as long as the limitations are things that we can work with, we will allow for that. What we call it light duty or modified duty status. And so we do have that. Some of the folks who are on that status do things like redactions for releases of information regarding Public Record Act requests, so like videos. If we have to redact videos, someone actually has to physically watch, hours and hours and hours of video and redact things that are confidential, like, people's names or dates of birth or license plates off of vehicles. They actually have to manipulate the video to remove that confidential information, and that's very labor intensive, and it's just increasing. As most of you probably know, the records release thing is a very, very time consuming process. But we do try to utilize our officers and other employees to the best of their ability within the confines of their medical limitations.
Thanks, Chief. Well, we've come to the end of our time. I have one last quick kind of question, and one is really simple. One is, what are the number that we have on our current traffic officers? And two, besides the community ambassador program, and I can probably speak to some of this, how can people get involved with RPD? How can folks volunteer and help support?
Okay. We have 1 sergeant and 5 officers assigned to traffic right now. So hopefully that answers that question. I would like it to be more. There was a time when we had, I think at the height, 8 or 9 traffic officers in addition to the sergeant. And I would like to see more of the motorcycles being used out there, because traffic, as I know all of you know, is a major issue for the city of Richmond. There's a lot of crazy drivers, a lot of drunk drivers, a lot of crashes. The second part of your question was in terms of volunteering and helping. I think the first step is Michelle, because she is the absolute dynamo of the police department in terms of coordinating and getting people involved. We do plan to have a community safety academy this year. How that looks, we're still trying to figure that out. I really wish it could be in person, because there are things that you just have to experience, but I don't know if we're going to be able to do it in person. If we can, or at least some of it, maybe we can.
Yeah, and I would encourage everybody, I thank everybody for coming out, and thank you, Chief, for your time. I think this was a great conversation, and hopefully there'll be a part 2 at some point in time, to have a follow-up. But definitely encourage everybody to get involved in Neighborhood Watch, those who participated in block captain training. We do have police volunteers. We're a little bit more restricted because of COVID on what we can do, but there still are plenty of things that people can get involved and engaged in. Well, thank you, everyone. We appreciate it. Hope that you come back next month. Every month we have a different topic that's important. So please share those topics with Carla or myself. And we will see everybody next month. Thank you.